Every doctor says the same things because the human body keeps collapsing in the same predictable ways. That is the truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The modern world has trained people to believe that health is complicated, mysterious, and dependent on hidden secrets available only to experts, supplements, or advanced treatments. But the deeper science becomes, the more uncomfortable the reality starts to look. Most physical and mental decline is not caused by rare biological failure. It is caused by repeated daily behaviors that slowly push the body beyond what it was designed to tolerate. The human organism evolved in environments defined by movement, recovery, natural rhythms, and periods of genuine rest. Modern life reversed almost all of those conditions in less than a century. The nervous system is now overloaded by constant stimulation. Sleep cycles are disrupted by artificial light and digital exposure. Food is engineered for addiction instead of nourishment. Stress no longer arrives in short bursts followed by recovery. It remains active continuously, trapping the body inside low-grade survival mode for years at a time. Then people act shocked when exhaustion, anxiety, obesity, hormonal imbalance, and chronic disease begin appearing everywhere at the same time. That is why medical advice sounds repetitive. The body keeps responding to the same destructive patterns with the same warning signals. Fatigue is not random. Brain fog is not random. Poor sleep is not random. Constant inflammation, emotional instability, declining focus, and metabolic dysfunction are not random events appearing independently across society. They are biological reactions to environments the human body was never built to survive indefinitely. The frightening reality is that most people are trying to outsmart biology while ignoring its most fundamental laws. The body does not care about motivation, excuses, ambition, or modern culture. It responds only to repeated input. Repeated stress changes the nervous system. Repeated poor sleep damages recovery. Repeated overeating disrupts metabolism. Repeated inactivity weakens nearly every major system in the body. Small actions repeated daily become physical identity over time, whether those actions build resilience or destroy it. What makes this even more dangerous is how invisible the process feels in the beginning. Human beings are terrible at detecting slow damage. When consequences do not appear immediately, the brain assumes the behavior is safe. That illusion allows people to spend years accumulating biological debt without realizing what is happening internally. By the time symptoms become impossible to ignore, the damage has often been building silently for a very long time. This is the part nobody wants to hear. Most people do not actually need more information. They already know which habits are draining their energy, destroying their focus, and weakening their body. The real issue is confrontation. Genuine health requires confronting patterns that society normalized but biology never accepted. And the longer those patterns continue, the louder the body eventually becomes. The human body records everything. Every hour of lost sleep, every chronic stress response, every ultra-processed meal, every sedentary day leaves traces inside biological systems, whether those effects are immediately visible or not. That is one of the most misunderstood realities in modern health. Most people imagine disease as something sudden, something that appears without warning, but biology rarely works that way. The body changes gradually, adapting to repeated conditions over time until dysfunction becomes the new internal normal. High blood pressure does not emerge in a single moment. Insulin resistance does not develop overnight. Chronic inflammation, hormonal imbalance, metabolic dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, and even cognitive decline often spend years developing silently beneath the surface before symptoms finally force attention. The body constantly attempts to compensate, to maintain stability despite repeated overload. That compensation creates the dangerous illusion that nothing serious is happening. Energy may decline slowly enough to feel normal. Poor sleep may become so familiar that exhaustion starts feeling like personality instead of dysfunction. Stress becomes routine. Brain fog becomes routine. Constant fatigue becomes routine. What should feel alarming slowly becomes accepted as ordinary human existence. This is where modern biology becomes deeply unsettling. The nervous system and metabolic system are shaped by accumulation, not isolated events. One poor meal changes very little. Thousands of poor meals reshape insulin signaling, gut function, inflammatory pathways, and energy regulation. One night of sleep deprivation is recoverable. Years of disrupted recovery alter hormones, cognition, immune function, and emotional regulation. The body responds to patterns, not intentions. Repeated actions become biological instructions that tell the organism how to adapt. That adaptation process is relentless. The body is always asking the same question: what environment am I being trained to survive in? If stress is constant, the nervous system becomes more stress-oriented. If inactivity dominates daily life, the body reduces physical capacity because unused systems are biologically expensive to maintain. If overstimulation becomes normal, attention span and dopamine sensitivity begin to change accordingly. Biology is efficient, not emotional. It strengthens what is repeatedly used and weakens what is repeatedly neglected. The frightening part is how long these processes remain invisible. Humans are psychologically wired to react to immediate danger, not slow deterioration. That is why people continue destructive habits for years while convincing themselves they are fine simply because collapse has not happened yet. But the absence of immediate pain does not mean the absence of damage. The body keeps score continuously, quietly tracking every repeated behavior until eventually symptoms appear not as isolated problems, but as accumulated consequences finally reaching the surface. Modern healthcare is extraordinarily powerful at preventing death, stabilizing emergencies, and treating acute illness. But most people fundamentally misunderstand what medicine was originally designed to do. The medical system is primarily structured around intervention. It responds when damage has already progressed far enough to become measurable, painful, or life-threatening. Biology, however, operates by a completely different set of rules. The human body rewards prevention far more effectively than it rewards repair, and that difference explains why the same medical advice keeps appearing over and over again across every clinic, hospital, and healthcare system in the world. The uncomfortable truth is that many chronic conditions dominating modern society are not sudden biological accidents. They are the predictable outcome of repeated environmental and behavioral pressures acting on the body for years. Poor sleep gradually disrupts hormonal regulation and nervous system recovery. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated and weakens immune stability. Constant overeating overwhelms metabolic systems that evolved under conditions of scarcity, not abundance. Physical inactivity slowly reduces cardiovascular efficiency, muscular function, insulin sensitivity, and even cognitive performance. None of these processes are mysterious. They are deeply understood biological responses to repeated conditions. This creates a difficult reality that many people resist emotionally. Medicine can manage symptoms, delay progression, and sometimes reverse damage, but no treatment fully protects the body from ongoing self-destruction. Medication may reduce blood pressure, but it cannot fully erase the physiological consequences of constant stress, poor sleep, inactivity, and inflammatory overload. Surgery may repair damaged tissue, but it cannot permanently override the behaviors that created the deterioration. The body continuously responds to environment long after treatment ends. That is why prevention sounds repetitive. Prevention depends on consistency, not novelty. The body requires stable recovery cycles, movement, proper nutrition, nervous system regulation, and metabolic balance repeatedly over time. These are not wellness trends or motivational slogans. They are biological maintenance requirements. Ignore them long enough and the organism eventually begins reallocating energy away from long-term optimization toward short-term survival. Recovery weakens, energy production declines, hormonal balance shifts, inflammation rises. The body adapts downward in order to survive chronic overload. The deeper science becomes, the clearer this pattern appears. Human biology is highly adaptive but not infinitely tolerant. Every repeated condition trains the body toward a certain state. Recovery trains resilience. Overload trains dysfunction. Movement trains capacity. Inactivity trains decline. The body is constantly adapting to what it experiences most often, whether those conditions are helping or harming it. That adaptation is automatic, emotionless, and brutally honest. Biology does not respond to what people hope will happen. It responds to what is repeatedly done. Most people still think stress is primarily emotional, something that exists only in the mind as worry, pressure, or anxiety. But biology sees stress very differently. Stress is not just a feeling. It is a full-body survival response capable of reshaping nearly every major system inside the human organism. The moment the brain perceives threat, pressure, uncertainty, or overload, the nervous system begins reallocating energy and resources away from long-term repair toward immediate survival. Heart rate changes, hormones shift, digestion slows, sleep quality weakens, immune function becomes unstable, attention narrows. The body prepares for danger even when no physical danger is actually present. The problem is that the human nervous system evolved to handle short-term stress, followed by recovery. For most of human history, stress arrived in brief bursts. Physical threats, environmental danger, periods of scarcity, and then the body returned to balance once the threat disappeared. Modern life destroyed that recovery pattern. Stress is no longer occasional, it has become continuous. Endless notifications, financial pressure, social comparison, overstimulation, information overload, artificial light exposure, sleep disruption, and constant mental engagement trap millions of people inside low-grade survival states that remain active for years without interruption. What makes this especially dangerous is how normal it begins to feel. The nervous system adapts to chronic stress so gradually that dysfunction starts becoming psychologically invisible. Exhaustion becomes ordinary. Poor sleep becomes expected. Emotional instability becomes personality. Constant stimulation becomes necessary just to avoid mental discomfort. People begin functioning in biologically compromised states for so long that genuine recovery feels unfamiliar. That adaptation creates one of the greatest health illusions in modern society, the belief that surviving stress means the body is handling it well. But survival is not the same as health. The body can tolerate overload for surprisingly long periods while quietly accumulating damage underneath the surface. Chronic stress alters cortisol regulation, increases systemic inflammation, weakens metabolic efficiency, disrupts hormonal balance, impairs recovery, and changes how the brain processes emotion and decision-making. Over time, the nervous system becomes less flexible, more reactive, and more energy inefficient. The organism begins prioritizing short-term survival over long-term optimization because biology assumes the environment remains dangerous. This is why foundational medical advice constantly returns to sleep, recovery, movement, breathing, nervous system regulation, and stress reduction. These are not optional lifestyle improvements. They are biological reset mechanisms required to keep the organism functioning properly under modern conditions. Ignore them long enough and the body eventually stops operating in performance mode altogether. It shifts into conservation mode, where energy, clarity, motivation, resilience, and even identity itself begins slowly deteriorating under the weight of continuous internal pressure. One of the most disturbing realities hidden beneath modern health problems is that many people are no longer living according to biological needs. They are living according to stimulation cycles. The nervous system has become trapped inside constant artificial reward loops that flood the brain with short bursts of dopamine while quietly exhausting the systems responsible for focus, emotional stability, motivation, and recovery. Sugar, endless scrolling, processed entertainment, digital overload, instant gratification, and non-stop stimulation have created environments where the brain rarely experiences silence, stillness, or genuine recovery anymore. The human nervous system was never designed to handle this level of continuous input. For most of human history, stimulation was limited, and survival depended on conserving attention carefully. Modern environments reverse that completely. Attention is now treated as a resource to be captured, manipulated, and monetized. Every application, notification, advertisement, video, and algorithm competes aggressively for neurological engagement because human attention has become one of the most valuable commodities in existence. The result is a nervous system that remains constantly activated, constantly distracted, and increasingly unable to regulate itself naturally. This creates a dangerous biological misunderstanding. Many people confuse stimulation with happiness because both involve dopamine activity, but they are not remotely the same thing. Stimulation creates temporary excitement and novelty. Genuine well-being requires stability, recovery, meaning, and nervous system balance. Overstimulated brains begin losing sensitivity to ordinary experiences. Simple activities no longer feel rewarding. Patience weakens. Focus weakens. Emotional regulation becomes unstable. Sleep quality declines because the nervous system struggles to disengage from continuous input. The brain gradually adapts to higher and higher levels of stimulation, while everyday life starts feeling emotionally flat by comparison. The consequences are appearing everywhere. Rising anxiety, burnout, addictive behaviors, attention problems, emotional exhaustion, sleep disorders, and chronic fatigue are not isolated problems emerging independently. They are deeply connected to nervous systems overwhelmed by non-stop stimulation and deprived of true recovery. The body cannot heal properly while remaining trapped inside constant neurological activation. Recovery requires periods of reduced input where the nervous system can return to baseline instead of continuously preparing for the next dopamine spike or emotional trigger. What makes this cycle especially destructive is that distraction often becomes a method of avoiding self-confrontation. Silence forces awareness. Stillness exposes exhaustion. Recovery reveals how overwhelmed the body actually feels underneath constant stimulation. That is why slowing down often feels uncomfortable at first. Not because recovery is unnatural, but because overload became normal. The nervous system adapted to chaos so completely that calmness now feels unfamiliar. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes for the brain to remember what genuine mental clarity and biological balance once felt like. Most people believe their behavior is driven primarily by motivation, discipline, or personal choice. But biology and behavioral science repeatedly show something far more uncomfortable. Human behavior is heavily shaped by environment. The surroundings a person lives in quietly influence decisions, habits, emotional states, energy levels, eating patterns, sleep quality, and even long-term health outcomes long before conscious willpower enters the equation. This is one of the reasons the same medical advice appears repeatedly across every healthcare system. Doctors understand that lasting health change rarely comes from temporary motivation alone. It comes from changing the conditions that continuously shape behavior beneath awareness. The human brain evolved to conserve energy and adapt efficiently to repeated surroundings. Environments filled with processed food increase the likelihood of overeating because the nervous system constantly responds to visual cues, convenience, and reward signaling. Sedentary environments gradually reduce movement because the body adapts to the level of physical demand placed upon it. Constant digital stimulation trains shorter attention spans and weakens the brain's tolerance for stillness. Artificial light exposure late at night disrupts circadian rhythms regardless of how motivated someone feels about sleep. Repeated exposure becomes biological instruction. The body adjusts itself around what it experiences most often. This creates a hidden conflict between modern environments and ancient biology. Human physiology developed under conditions requiring movement, recovery, social connection, natural light exposure, and periods of genuine mental quiet. Modern systems often provide the opposite. Endless convenience reduces physical activity. Continuous digital input overwhelms attention systems. Highly processed food exploits reward pathways evolved for survival under scarcity, not abundance. Work structures frequently reward stress, sleep deprivation, and constant availability instead of recovery and balance. People then blame themselves personally for struggling inside systems that were never designed to support long-term biological stability. That does not remove personal responsibility, but it changes the understanding of why behavior becomes so difficult to change. Willpower alone cannot consistently overpower environments that reinforce destructive habits every hour of the day. The nervous system eventually adapts to repeated conditions, whether those conditions are healthy or harmful. That is why foundational medical advice focuses so heavily on routines, structure, sleep environments, stress management, movement patterns, and nutritional habits instead of relying purely on motivation. Sustainable health requires creating conditions where healthy behavior becomes easier and destructive behavior becomes harder. The body is constantly responding to environmental signals. Every repeated surrounding teaches the nervous system what to prioritize, what to ignore, and what state of functioning is considered normal. Over time, environment becomes biology. Daily surroundings quietly shape future health long before symptoms ever appear, and most people never realize how powerfully their environment has been programming them until the consequences become impossible to ignore. Modern culture is obsessed with intensity. Extreme transformations, rapid results, aggressive routines, and dramatic personal reinventions dominate nearly every conversation about health and self-improvement. People are taught to believe that lasting change comes from pushing harder, suffering more, and forcing massive short-term effort. But the human body does not operate according to emotional intensity. Biology responds to repeated signals over time. Consistency shapes the organism far more powerfully than temporary extremes ever will. And this is one of the most important truths hidden behind the repetitive medical advice people constantly hear. The nervous system, metabolic system, muscular system, hormonal system, and cardiovascular system all adapt gradually through exposure and repetition. One healthy meal changes very little internally. Thousands of meals consumed consistently over years reshape metabolism, inflammation levels, insulin sensitivity, gut microbiome balance, and energy production. One night of quality sleep cannot repair months of chronic exhaustion, but repeated recovery slowly restores hormonal stability, cognitive performance, immune regulation, and nervous system flexibility. One intense workout may create fatigue and soreness, but repeated movement over long periods fundamentally changes cardiovascular efficiency, muscular endurance, mitochondrial density, and long-term disease resistance. This slow biological adaptation frustrates modern psychology because the human brain is naturally attracted to immediate reward and visible transformation. Dramatic effort feels productive because it creates emotional intensity. Small, repeated actions feel insignificant because their effects remain invisible at first. That illusion causes many people to abandon healthy behaviors before meaningful adaptation has enough time to occur. The body changes quietly long before external results become obvious. Cellular repair, hormonal adjustments, nervous system recalibration, and metabolic improvements often begin internally long before visible physical transformation appears. This is why extreme approaches fail so often. The body interprets severe restriction, overtraining, chronic stress, or unsustainable routines as survival threats rather than stable long-term conditions. Eventually, energy collapses, motivation disappears, recovery weakens, and the nervous system pushes back against overload. People mistake this biological resistance for personal weakness, when in reality the body is protecting itself from unsustainable conditions. Lasting health cannot be built through repeated cycles of self-destruction, followed by temporary bursts of discipline. Medicine repeatedly emphasizes foundational consistency because biology consistently rewards stability. The body thrives when recovery, movement, nutrition, sleep, and stress regulation occur reliably over long periods of time. Small actions repeated daily accumulate into powerful biological momentum. Over months and years, those repeated signals reshape physical capacity, emotional stability, energy production, and disease resistance in ways most people underestimate completely. The harsh truth is that many individuals are not failing because they lack information or potential. They are failing because they continue chasing emotional intensity while underestimating the transformative power of consistency. One of the most unforgiving realities of human biology is that the body does not negotiate with denial. A person can ignore exhaustion, dismiss poor sleep, normalize stress, or pretend unhealthy habits are harmless, but the organism continues responding to those conditions regardless of belief. Biology does not care what someone hopes is true. It reacts to repeated behavior with absolute consistency. That is why so many people are shocked when health problems eventually appear. The warning signs were present for years, but denial created the illusion that survival meant safety. The human body is remarkably adaptive, and that adaptability often becomes dangerous because it allows dysfunction to remain hidden long enough for people to normalize it psychologically. Energy levels decline slowly, so fatigue begins feeling ordinary. Stress remains constant, so anxiety starts feeling like personality. Poor sleep becomes routine, so exhaustion no longer feels abnormal. The nervous system adapts to overload so efficiently that people can continue functioning while major biological systems quietly deteriorate beneath the surface. This creates a false sense of resilience when, in reality, the organism is operating under accumulated strain. The deeper problem is that humans are emotionally uncomfortable confronting long-term consequences. Immediate pleasure almost always feels more psychologically powerful than distant risk. Processed food provides short-term reward long before metabolic dysfunction appears. Chronic overstimulation feels entertaining long before attention systems weaken. Sedentary behavior feels comfortable long before cardiovascular decline becomes measurable. The body keeps absorbing these repeated signals silently while the mind focuses only on the absence of immediate pain. That gap between action and consequence is where denial becomes destructive. But biological systems never stop recording patterns. Poor recovery continues altering hormonal regulation whether it is acknowledged or not. Chronic stress continues increasing inflammatory load whether someone feels productive or exhausted. Metabolic dysfunction continues progressing whether external symptoms are visible yet or not. The organism constantly adjusts itself around repeated conditions because adaptation is built into survival itself. The body cannot simply ignore repeated overload because doing so would threaten long-term survival. This is why medical advice sounds repetitive across generations and cultures. Human biology keeps reacting to the same destructive patterns in the same predictable ways. The body repeatedly sends the same warning signals because the underlying behaviors remain remarkably similar. Overeating, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, inactivity, overstimulation, and emotional exhaustion continue producing the same biological consequences, regardless of modern technology or cultural progress. Reality itself remains repetitive because biology remains repetitive. The body responds to action, not denial, and eventually every ignored signal demands attention through fatigue, dysfunction, pain, or disease. By the time most people finally listen, The organism has often been asking for change for far longer than they ever realized. Modern society tends to associate complexity with intelligence. The more complicated something sounds, the more advanced people assume it must be. Simple truths are often dismissed as obvious, repetitive, or unimportant because the human mind has been conditioned to believe that real expertise must sound difficult to understand. But science repeatedly reveals the opposite pattern. In medicine, the deepest understanding often produces the simplest conclusions. That simplicity is not a lack of sophistication, it is the result of overwhelming evidence collapsing enormous complexity into stable biological truths that continue surviving every layer of scientific testing. Behind every piece of basic health advice exists an extraordinary amount of research, experimentation, and accumulated medical knowledge. Sleep regulation alone involves hormonal cycles, circadian rhythm signaling, neurotransmitter recovery, immune repair, memory consolidation, metabolic balance, and nervous system restoration. Movement affects cardiovascular efficiency, mitochondrial function, insulin sensitivity, inflammatory regulation, cognitive performance, emotional stability, and long-term disease resistance simultaneously. Nutrition influences gut microbiome diversity, hormonal communication, cellular energy production, immune activity, brain chemistry, and systemic inflammation. The underlying biology is immensely complicated, but after decades of research across millions of people, the conclusions become remarkably consistent. This creates a misunderstanding that traps many people. Because the advice sounds simple, they assume the science behind it must also be simple. In reality, the opposite is true. Simple medical guidance often represents the final distilled output of thousands of scientific studies, removing weaker explanations until only the strongest patterns remain. Complexity is gradually filtered away until stable truths become impossible to ignore. That is why doctors across different countries, healthcare systems, and cultures continue repeating the same foundational recommendations. Those recommendations survive scientific scrutiny because human biology consistently responds to the same conditions in predictable ways. The problem is that people are psychologically attracted to novelty more than consistency. Complicated diets, extreme optimization strategies, miracle supplements, and revolutionary health trends often feel more exciting than foundational behaviors because novelty creates emotional stimulation. But the body does not prioritize novelty. It prioritizes stability, recovery, adaptation, and long-term balance. The systems responsible for human survival evolved around repeated biological requirements, not constant experimentation. Sleep still matters. Recovery still matters. Nutrition still matters. Movement still matters. Stress regulation still matters. Human connection still matters. These principles remain stable because they are woven into the organism itself. The uncomfortable reality is that many individuals continue searching for advanced solutions while ignoring foundational biological laws already proven repeatedly by science. The body does not become healthy through intellectual fascination alone. It becomes healthy through repeated alignment with the conditions it was designed to function within. That is why the simplest advice often carries the deepest scientific weight. It survived because reality kept proving it true generation after generation. Everything ultimately comes down to a single uncomfortable reality. The body is already responding to your current life, not your future intentions. It is not waiting for motivation to arrive. It is not waiting for the perfect plan. It is not waiting for a better version of discipline that might show up someday. Biology is constantly adapting in real time to what is repeatedly done, and every single choice is quietly shaping the direction of that adaptation. Health is not something that begins later. It is something that is being built or damaged right now, in small, invisible increments that accumulate into future outcomes long before awareness catches up. Most people already know at some level what is harming them. The signals are not hidden, energy levels are unstable, sleep is inconsistent, focus is fragmented, stress feels constant, recovery feels incomplete. The body communicates through patterns, not words, and those patterns are already pointing toward imbalance long before any diagnosis or crisis appears. The issue is not lack of information. It is avoidance of responsibility for information that is already understood but not acted upon. Awareness without action creates no change in biology. Only repetition does.